without any further ado, I'd like to introduce our very distinguished guest. We're honored to have her with us. Please welcome Pia Gilbert.
I'm really very happy to be here. And I'm still completely under the influence of yesterday. Both the afternoon session that I stumbled in on because the play was late, and that marvelous concert last night, which really I was enchanted. And I think all of us who are composers realize that very often we do this kind of thing, we don't like it. Once you put the black dots down and you really use them, something happens to the spontaneity that isn't quite the same as when it was fresh. And occasionally we get back to it, and occasionally we don't. But I thought it was all, I was going to say in such good taste, but then I remember once Ned Long said to me, well, don't say that. Things are not in good taste or bad taste. They're either, there is taste and then there's no taste. There was taste. Also in the brevity, that people knew that if you remember, and it was just delightful, the whole thing, and very reassuring that we're in the right place. Because, and there are many things that I want to address, maybe because of some of the discussions we've already had going to and fro the hotel, very noisy hotel. And I'm not like my friend John Cage, who felt that every noise was worth listening to. I got up and reprimanded the girls in the hallways and so on, instead of listening to them. Great joy. The things that were mentioned for me to go into a little bit more, I mean not a little bit more, but actually I had other notes to bring today, so I'll address some of those, but I'll mainly readdress a couple of the things that apparently I said too quickly yesterday. One was that yes, in the book that was written in the 50s called Music for the Modern Dance, I'm still committed to many of the same accompaniment principles that are printed in that book. Those have not changed. What has been overtaken that I would like very differently are the sections on 20th century music, in fact the whole historical development, which was done somewhat haphazardly, because it hadn't been done at all in books, about musical dance. And so that has to be done much more carefully and much more, with more authenticity and more bibliography and so on. So if any of you want to work with me on this, I would welcome it, because I don't think I'll get around to it myself for another decade, and that's a bit iffy at my point in life. So let me know if it interests you. Perhaps you can revive this and have it available again. Then a couple of you asked me to go into what I said I do in the historical area when I teach music for dance. And let me just say for a moment that I hadn't really done this at Juilliard. I did it at UCLA, and we had 3 courses, 2 undergraduate and 1 graduate seminar. At Juilliard, the courses that they call the L&M, Literature and Materials, are taught by people in the music department. And there, of course, at Juilliard, I am in the music department. As a matter of fact, I'm not in the dance department. And so they asked me to teach one course in music for dance, and I'm teaching it my way, which is very different. The people who teach it from the music department are all quite wonderful and lovely and really love dance, but occasionally I think some of them are more apt to think that they love loving dance, rather than really knowing it. That it's an affinity and a love for being there, rather than the love of having experienced it and having lived in dance as all of us have. So that the approach is different, and they are anxious to make the dancers as literate as possible in terms of knowledge of music. And of course we are interested in that as well. It's important to have them be articulate. And we have so many of our colleagues in music think or say, I've heard so many times musicians say, oh, the dancers are so unmusical. Well, they aren't. I don't know any unmusical dancers. They wouldn't be in dance if they were unmusical, but they're illiterate sometimes, they're inarticulate. And that's where the confusion arises. And it is important that they are able to read notation, that they're able to talk to the conductor, and not say, let's take it again from diddly-diddly-dee, everything was diddly-diddly-dee. And so the conductors despair at what the dancers seemingly don't know. In fact, I remember once Bob Irwin, as you know, conducted ballet theater and New York City Ballet, and he said, as far as I'm concerned, dancers only know 2 tempi, too fast and too slow. That's what he's encountered more often than that they say, is this what you mean by allegro? So we do have to do that. We do have to remind ourselves that some of the nitty-gritty of knowing notation, of knowing history, of knowing what music is about from the point of view of reading and writing it, as well as experiencing it and loving it, I think is indeed our assignment, regardless of how we could come about it. But it's not the only way. It's not the only thing. The kinds of things that we were talking about yesterday afternoon, I was just so happy. In fact, it's so wonderful to see a whole group of people, not as a support group, it sounds so therapeutic, but and that kind of togetherness is very comforting. I think every one of us, I know I have felt for many years completely alone, and I was telling Jess and some other people that for my whole life I was always known as that crazy lady. First was the crazy lady down in the gym, and it was that crazy lady in the dance department, and somebody said, what department? You were at the university, what is that? Is there such a thing as a dance department? Or you sit with your colleagues, the other professors on the faculty in the faculty dining room, and you tell them, this is what you're doing, you're teaching musical dance and aesthetics, and they say, well, what does that mean? Whereas when they say, I teach chemistry, if I said, what does that mean? They would be quite offended, right? And they would not expect to be able to tell me over lunch what it means to teach physics. But they expect us to tell them in 2 or 3 sentences what it means to teach music for, or music as such, or music per se. And music per se is what I've come to the last decade or so, thanks to John Cage, who said we need a publisher. Because up to then, I wasn't at all worried as to whether my music was disposable or not, and what happened to the scores after the dance performances were over, or the theater performances had evaporated. But then there was this enormous heap of material. So he took me to Peters, who said, yes, of course, yes, we'd like to do you. And from that moment on, I started to think of what I was issuing in a somewhat more solemn manner, and got pushed into writing compositions that were not for dance, but included. I have not ever written anything that did not have dance images or theater images, because I feel that's my world, and the others can do their world. And if I don't do my world, I'm not being authentic. So that has stayed, even though I haven't really done much music for dance recently. It's still music with dance, dance in the music, theater in the music. And sometimes it invites choreography, even though I don't necessarily want it. I want it to be divided imagery rather than an implemented one. But to get back to some of the questions yesterday, in teaching history of music for dancers, and as far as I'm concerned, I would love to see it for anybody. I like to look it up from the time that I talk about, always with where we are now. For instance, as I said, I see no problem with talking about the rhythmic elasticity of Gregorian chant with Sprechstimme techniques, because that's the same. It involves speech rhythms, breath rhythms, the natural rhythms of the words and the syllables. So we are doing what we did then, we're doing it again now. I also do that with the minute we get to Baroque contrapuntal devices, such as retrogradation, inversion, and you name them all. Exactly the same thing we use in the 12-tone method. By the way, Schoenberg never said system. He really wanted it to be looked at as a method of working. And the other thing that's important here is to remember that he never taught the 12-tone method, not ever. And I sat in quite a few of his classes. It was mostly Bach and counterpoint, and some analysis of Beethoven's sonatas. And I think the only ones who really studied that particular aspect were some of the private students, like Barry and Weber, you know, came out quite well with that method. So that is not really a paradox. We are, I think all of us are interested in paradoxes in this area. They are delicious, they're wonderful, and they are not, one is not negating the other. I was saying to Gwendolyn earlier that I was delighted to hear her in the afternoon making a passionate plea for Schubert. And I thought, oh, you know, well, of course Schubert, we all like Schubert, but why is that something we would have to make a plea for? But it is indeed. It's something that one shouldn't just take for granted. And then the same Gwendolyn in the evening was kind of mad on the cello, and that was not, I don't consider a paradox either. That's the way we are, you know. We love Mozart and we climb the walls and hit the top of the ceiling with our mallets because that's the sound we want at that point. And the only sound that will do at that point for what we're doing. By the way, I don't need to make a speech here, and any time I say anything that you want to have clarified or you want to argue with, just because it says conversation with me, it doesn't say speech by. So I will just go on until, but also, you know, happenings, multimedia, we don't have happenings anymore, but when we had them, we all thought, and I remember flying through the armory on all fours, thinking that this was a very novel, interesting way of behaving. But when you think back in medieval times, some of the very same things were happening, only they weren't called that. And yes?
I was going to make an observation that the more professionally driven a dance program is, the less room is made available for experimental and multimedia work, because it seems as if they're trying to feed dancers into the marketplace.
Anymore. And I couldn't be more sad about it, because I think as we get more professional, we should get even more courageous. We should have that where we started with no departments. There wasn't really a music department. I'm talking about 47, 48 when I first started there. There was voice hall, and people who were interested in music and did music, and people who were interested in dance and did dance and theater. We all worked together, and we did the most wonderful things together. And there were no hard-edged divisions between the divisions. Gradually, we got divisions and departments and chairs of departments. And marketing set in, which is always in my letters. And we became slightly competitive because first there was really, when I think back, it's not that long ago in terms of history. It's long ago in terms of some of your lives, but 30 years, when there was a bottomless pit. I was also in charge of the concert series at UCLA, which was indeed enormously luxurious. And there was no worry about whom you could invite to come and play and talk and so on. Then the pit got a bottom, and now the pit has a lid. And it's much more difficult now to ask for grants. You can ask, of course, but to have these monies delivered and to make demands that when artists come, I always demanded that when the artists came to a campus, they came indeed to a campus. And they were there to work with students, to be involved, and not to be what I call the hidden one artist, whom we had to interpret when they left, that they had to do their own interpretation. And it was so luxurious to think the first time we had Cunningham and Cage, we only had Voice Hall, which seats 1,800 people, and 50 people showed up, 50 people in Voice Hall. But nobody worried. We thought these 50 people were very important. And so and that Cunningham company, in my view, they came in a Volkswagen bus or van, and there was Mercy and John and Caroline Brown and Jasper Johns and Bob Rauschenberg and what have you in the company as you knew it. And as I said, 50 people showed up and we had a wonderful time. That would be a disaster today because we would think of that as an enormous embarrassment, not only from a financial point of view, but from whatever point of view. But really the atmosphere was so different then. It was so much more open to, well, that doesn't mean these 50 people should have stayed home, or the company should have stayed home, but we were all in this, and every one of them was dignified, had the dignity of being there. Now I saw a couple of hands, that, and also Ronald, yes.
I just wanted to mention something that I've been noticing all weekend, and Vernon touched on this yesterday, that not only is there a lot of compartmentalization in our society and in our universities, but even the people here, I've noticed all weekend tend to talk about, well, the dancers this and the dancers that, as if dancers haven't heard music all their life and experienced it the same way we all did when we were kids, and as if there was even when the dancers were there in the studio to talk about the dancers, as if they're a different kind of, in a different compartment.
I'm going to talk to that in a moment, but I want to get at the other, I think it was you just
Getting back to what Richard said about professional training, professionally oriented dance departments in schools, just for the sake of marketability, it doesn't work. But I don't think marketability is a dirty word at all. Because the professional training program, if it's really aware of the dance world, the more skills the dancer has, other than their own dance technique, the more hireable they are.
Well,
if they're hireable, then they can make a contribution.
Well, I don't think that that's at all in question.
Okay.
I think that in every dance department, we want, and music department and theater department, we want to graduate as highly skilled and as highly knowledgeable a graduate as we can. In fact, when we were developing the dance program at UCLA, we about it, and I felt it was important to not think first year, second year, this course, that course, but we envisioned the graduate and what his knowledge and what his potential, what his, what did you call it, skills and what have you, he would have. And we put all that down, and when we had that portrait of this somewhat idealized graduate, then we developed the curriculum to meet these demands. Instead of the other way around, where you build into little bits and pieces and discrete courses that don't really give you that composite. Richard?
I want to go back to what I said about experimentation, etc. I think that no configuration of acquired skills is going to guarantee any success in the field if the student graduates without a sense of his or her individual artistic identity. And experimentation, and where better to do it but in this wonderful little world of the university, experimentation is a way of finding yourself.
See, I think at the university it's even more apt to happen that this kind of thing will blossom. It's at times, and this is true at the music department and dance department and theater department in the conservatory, where the Juilliard, I'm talking about the music student now, the Juilliard graduate is really looked at mainly as far as how well does he play. Everything else is nice, but not really as visible and audible as far as the administration is concerned. The dance department similarly has that approach, and they have some rather stringent, they make some rather stringent efforts of threatening people who are overweight, for instance. They have something called weight probation. It's the first time I heard of that. And
That's not
no, it's not unusual, but it's a problem. And so you get a good amount of anorexia. You get a good amount of that kind of illness, both mental and physical, of anxiety, where these people don't necessarily want to be ballerinas. And to get back to earlier times, the dancer that I remember most from the Humphrey Whiteman days when I used to play for them was little Betty Osgood. You remember her? Fireball. Nobody ever forgot her. She was wonderful. She was wonderful. She never would be hired today, and it's a great pity. Now, naturally, she would not be in a ballerina ballet. What would she dance? But there were things that were choreographed for her and with her that other people could then take out, even though they were not the same. Nobody's the same. And in dance, that's more pronounced perhaps than even anywhere else, because the pianist or the clarinetist can be fat and small and what have you. It doesn't matter. The clarinet's the same. But the instrument with the dancer, is always different. Everybody looks different and should. And the whole concept of individual, both from the individual as a traditional artist, as experimenter, as a complement of both, with the contrast and the sameness. That's what we are in both disciplines. The thing that comes up quite often in I don't know if it's come up here before I arrived yesterday, but the dance musician, as considering himself second-class citizen or being considered that, comes up time and again, and we forget that it's really somebody else's fault, not the fault of the composer, musician, and dance. That this is the only place where dance and music, I'm talking about the West now, where dance and music are not together in the same locale with the same importance that there are languages on the globe, such as, for instance, the Australian Aborigines and some African tribes, where there isn't even another word. Music and dance are the same word, because they are assumed to live together. They are assumed to coexist. And it's not a matter of one accompanying the other. But since the advent of the proscenium arch, we have put the musicians into something called the pit. Where they are to be heard and not seen. And it makes a difference, therefore, how we coexist. And there, at this point in the century, we have come to accepting or even taking it for granted that the eye is stronger than the ear. The eye is more perceptive. We are more alert visually. It's the first time in history, as far as we know it, that because of the music pollution, we are told to tune out music. That's never happened before. We've not had music to do something else by. And by that I don't mean to dance with. I mean to eat by, to have your teeth grilled by, just awful. The kind of things that we are subjected to that they say, but isn't it, don't you hate it when you can't have music when you do your homework? Silence has become threatening. This is even true of music students, Juilliard students who are really accomplished. They say they've gotten used to it as well, that they will have something playing, not while they're doing their music homework, or while they're writing, but doing something else, doing other kinds of things, housework and what have you. Where I think most of us still are very much concerned with cultivating, as somebody said yesterday, the active listening rather than the passive hearing. And our music and sound and noise pollution is getting to the point where, I'm serious now, I really think that if this planet survives another few centuries, we will probably have to develop ear flaps. No, really, I really think that, as we had to develop eyelids, which we didn't have originally, in order to be able to, shut out light, so that we can shut out sound without having to tune it out internally, trying to ignore it, in other words. So this coexistence of music and dance that has been so dear to both for so many years in every culture has gotten those of us who are in this profession to worry about the respectability or the appreciation of the dance composer and the dance musician, even though we are of course interested in quote, serving the other art, but we don't want to service it, We don't want to be servile, and we don't want it to be there as something that is in the air. We want it to be very important, even if it is, again, as I said before, disposable. So should the choreography be. They should exist together. I, for many years, wrote things that were really not playable without the choreography. Long stretches of something that you would not repeat like that if you wrote a composition, but was absolutely right that the triangle would go ding, 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 ding for a long time while the dancer was racing across the stage. And other times where if the dancer stood absolutely still, but there was something emotionally grave going on, you would have the ensemble be at regular's pitch. And for the dance event, this was the right thing to do. Every time I get the composers come over, now it's the Juilliard composers, before it was the university composers, they say, oh, we would love to write something for dance. Can we write something for dance? But originally, what they have in mind is to write the Stravinsky ballet, you know, that would then be choreographed too, and when the choreography is over with, the music would survive and would be played as such as a ballet score. It's interesting, I remember Virgil Thompson saying, you know, they don't say anymore, this is a Stravinsky ballet or a Thompson ballet. They say it's a Balanchine ballet or whatever, you know, the choreographer. And I think that's true. And I don't think, frankly, I don't see anything wrong with it either way. But they should at least mention both. So that we are together on that. So as a result of some of this feeling that in some institutions, people who play for and compose for dance are now indeed on a faculty level, or at least on a yearly salary level. And I know this sounds terribly bread and butter, but it's important because it does make a difference. I found this out when I started when we had more and more classes and more things happening at UCLA. And by that point, the accompanists, I like to put that in quotes because I don't like the term anymore, were paid by the hour, similar to the typists. They both had keyboards, right? So that had to be at least changed. And then I felt it was, even if it didn't cost the university more, let's compute it. If they play this many hours and compose this many hours and indeed counsel the dancers and choreographers that many hours and hours, they over weekends and evenings, then that's, if you add all that up, that's the approximation of the salary. And the musician doesn't have to worry what happens at Christmas vacation, what happens during the summer, but there is this much money available. And I know it sounds a bit crass, but it's important to the self-image that it be a position. I'm quoting now some people who said it becomes a position rather than a job, and it's a salary rather than a wage. And it seems to make a big difference to the self-image and also the way the position appears in light of the total configuration. So I think we've made some advances there, but I found out just the other day, as I said, I've only been in the dance department at Juilliard for a little while, that indeed they're still being paid by the hour. And I'm going to make some noise because they're apparently afraid to make the noise, and I have nothing to lose. I'm officially retired because it's the
We're all a big noise.
Yeah. Of course. But even, the risk, I always have felt for so many years now, that the risk is in not talking, the risk is in not doing, the risk is not in the talking and the doing. It's a pity to think that you can't afford to say it, or you can't afford to do it. You can't afford not to.
I was going to say that one of the critical parts about having musicians only on an hourly is that here you have the dancers, the students have health insurance, the faculty has health insurance. And I mean, I frequently break strings when I'm playing in class. And imagine what would happen to an hourly musician who got hit in the eye with a broken string.
Yes.
Absolutely no coverage for such a thing. And health insurance, and we know that President Clinton is going to really push to improve that system, has to cover it. And that's also part of the dignity of having a position.
Exactly. It's as some of us talked yesterday, it's something that perhaps doesn't come on the philosophical aspects of what I'm supposed to talk about, but it makes a difference to the person as he sees himself or herself, and to be able to contribute in in the key in which he wishes to, instead of having to hold back and say, well, the hour is up. This is not psychiatry. The hour is never up in our field. We just keep going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about that thing of risk.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I've been so interested in that people like yourself are involved, and tenured people. Because I feel like some of the younger people have to ingratiate themselves with their departments. When you aren't full-time, one of the ways you keep your job, quite frankly, and we do this instinctively and things, so and they should speak out, but gently. But some of the rest of us who have more stable positions have to take bigger risks, I think.
And also feel protected toward the up-and-coming young people. Nevertheless, even, excuse me, did I go something?
The other, this happens at the University of Minnesota right now because of the fiscal crunch that's going on, is they are eliminating dance classes if there aren't enough people in the class. And so that not only is the accompanist out, the teacher is out of the money. And actually, in some of the private studios, the professional studios in Minneapolis right now, what's going on, and I don't think this is unusual anywhere else either, is that if the class load is too low, they'll eliminate the accompanist and not have any music at all.
Yes,
There is a risk, is what I'm saying.
of course, I'm not saying that there is no risk, or that you should just simply trample on what's existing and hope for the best. But I think either of these extremes, would be perhaps foolhardy. But when I was taking some of these lists, I really didn't know what was going to happen, and I did not have tenure. And many times in my life, I didn't know what was going to happen. And after 38 years at UCLA, I said, when we were refugees and coming over from Germany in 37, 38, there was trouble with learning English, and one of my uncles once got a little tired of something. He said, "Good enough is good enough." Good enough, go back to you. And see what happens. I really didn't know what I was going to do. I don't know what I thought I was going to do. I had no idea I was going to work at Julia. Absolutely nothing. And I was really looking forward to doing nothing. I haven't done that yet. Even during sabbaticals, as you know, you don't do nothing. You do a lot. But I'm doing a little more than I expected to. I'm teaching 3 classes. One class, and I will get into that a little bit. One class is for music students called aesthetics. And again, all the other composers say, "What do you mean, what is that?" And I said, "Well, composer, what is that? Tell me." And they never get past the first sentence. I'm honored to see Mr. Copeland out there because we use your book. And as one of the bibliographical sources, as well as, believe it or not, Suzanne Langer, who everybody said, because I know that it's labyrinthian writing, but it's so joyous to have an author who in the 50s had a chance to say A, B, C, D, E, and then go back to B and say, well, I'm not quite sure it was really this way. I'm going on to write in a kind of Graham spiral, this way, back, and up again, and down again, and it's a little confusing because publishers don't allow that anymore. Say what you have to say, or the editor will say, but you said this 10 pages ago, why are you saying it again? 10 pages ago I said it this way, now I have to say it that way because of what happened in the previous 9 pages. So it's very good that we still have those books available to have them. The idea is to think about music, is to really explore it, is to try to verbalize the nonverbal, which is very difficult, very delicious, somewhat aggravating, but very much worthwhile. And also I find that after a while, again, enough is enough, you can talk just so much. They have to bring their instruments, and they have never in their lives, I mean this literally, have ever improvised. And so whatever I have in that class, I have a trombone and a harpsichordist and, and clarinet and lots of pianists, of course, and a couple of singers. And nothing comes at the first improvisation. Somebody goes clarinet and toots a little bit and puts it down and says, what did I do? And this goes from that to where at the end of the semester, they really do some marvelous things. And I've now promised myself to report them so that they can tell what they've done, that they are encouraged. This used to always be part of the life of the musician, is being able to improvise, being able to enjoy improvisation. Of course, they are worried about their private teachers who think this is pretty much a waste of time. They should be practicing. They shouldn't be talking and improvising. That's a waste. But peculiarly, some of the ones that you would consider being more that way, such as, for instance, Dorothy DeLay, she's a junkie for this. She thinks it's crazy, but I'm used to being a crazy lady, whether a crazy lady down in the gym at UCLA or a crazy lady now up in the studio at Juilliard. It's okay with me. It's still risk-taking, and but not in terms of what you were saying earlier, because you can take a little more risk when you're retired on a pension. Quite true, than when you're up and coming trying to build a career. On the other hand, building a career should have certain risk elements. And the risk that I usually try to instill in some of my upcoming graduate students is don't go to a department that's already so well established that you're going to be the eternal junior faculty member. Go somewhere where there isn't much. Go somewhere where you can build a department from scratch and you can custom tailor what's happening. Because that's how it's going to be. It's going to be, and after all, they ask you to come because you have something special that you can build. Whoever heard of Bennington? Whoever heard of Aspen? Until somebody started something. And then these places become, it's marvelous to take something from nothing to something. It's so dramatic, and it's beginnings are always wonderfully dramatic and interesting and burgeoning. And then as the thing goes the way you want it to go, the increments in the excitement of discovery and so on will become smaller. But that's what you built. Well, I don't need to sermonize. Ask me a question. Oh, thank you.
That's a question.
That's a question. Yes.
Could you tell me or us about your music training?
Oh, yes, I'd be glad to because it's practically nil. I thought I was going to be a pianist. So I had, of course, piano lessons when I was little in Europe. Came to New York in 37, 38. Had to learn English, finish high school. Got a scholarship at the New York College of Music, where doesn't exist anymore. And I must say here that my father, we were all terribly poor. We couldn't take anything out of Germany. And he thought getting a scholarship was tantamount to charity. He didn't think I should accept it. We were too proud. So it took a lot of, relearning in terms of mentality. Well, anyway, I had very good piano lessons. And they discovered that I had a knack for improvisation. And I was so delighted to see we have Lotte Goslar in common. And about that time, I think it was perhaps 1939 or 40, a friend of mine from the same village that I came from in Germany, near Baden-Baden, said, would I accompany her? Lotte Goslar is having an audition for dancers. And of course, we all helped each other out with whatever anybody needed. But at the time, I also thought, and I still have this problem of thinking I'm invisible, inaudible, I'm a wallpaper. So I played for her. And Lottie, at the end of the audition, turned to my friend and said, thank you very much. And then she turned to me and she said, would you please stay? That was my entree into the dance world, honestly. And from then on, I started to get accepted by all the dancers. In the meantime, I never studied composition. Louis Horst took me under his wing. And, everybody always talks about how frightening he was and how fear-evoking and how terrible. He was an angel as far as I'm concerned. He really helped me to acknowledge what I could do. So that when I started to improvise for everybody, I didn't even think it was all that important because all the while I thought I was going to be a pianist. And actually gave a trombone recital and played with the National Orchestral Association, played the third Beethoven piano concerto, and Suzanne and I were talking about that. I'm so glad I did that because I never had to think I sour-baked myself, into the dance world. It was really something that I loved and stayed in, and I'm still in, even though I'm not doing the actual playing, even composing for dance anymore. I never had a composition class, and I'm not recommending that, mind you. This was simply because of the way life went. I had to. Somebody yesterday was saying you always have to be a step ahead. Sometimes I'm just a millimeter ahead of my composition students.
Could you tell us some of the specifics about what you felt you learned in Louis Horst?
It's difficult to say specifically because he let me do things and said, now, it would be better yet if. And I can't remember all the specifics, and frankly, I jumped around with the dancers when they did the Pavan, the Galliard, etc., and I'm doing that again with my dancers. When we talk about Baroque dance suite, we do it, a la Louis Horst, which is probably only semi-authentic. But it's better than not doing it at all and have all these music and dance groups mumbling about doing the way I did. And once you've done it, it's so much more in your system. You never again confuse the Galliard with anything else. You never again think of the sarabande only as Bach sarabande, because then it wasn't even danced. So that has always stayed. You see that aspect of it. The other aspect of what I learned was when Doris Humphrey said, you'd be a better musician yet for dance if you also did some dance with us. And at the time, I said, well, I can't afford it. Because, every penny was important. And she said, well, yes, you can, we'll pay for whatever classes, but then when you take a class as a dance student, then you play for one, and we're even. So I found that from that point on, playing for classes no longer meant playing for what I saw. It also meant playing for the muscle empathy that I experienced. And that's something that you can't get any other way. You can get a charming horse, haven't you? Just sitting at the piano and experiencing what the dancer experiences. Now that is not to be translated to when you write for the stage. Because there you write not only for what the audience perceives or should perceive, but you don't worry about whether it's going to help the dancer jump. They have to worry about that, you know. But so there is a difference in relating music for dance in the studio or the concert stage. And then I've done a lot of music for theater, which is a whole other approach, again, where I've divided it into editorial writing, such as you comment on the action, like recourse in a way, or the actual sounds that are being emitted, that the radio is playing or the band is playing, you know, that you have to provide. And I therefore also have always, if it's taped, different speakers, either on the stage or in the house. And talk about speakers. Do you have another few minutes? Yes? 5 minutes? I seem to have an international reputation for being inflexible when it comes to live music. I won't budge. I don't know what you're doing, but I think it's terribly important that if the dance is live, so is the music. And when they say, well, it's so much easier and the tape is so reliable, I say, so would the film be? You know. And when they say, on my record, we have the Juilliard Quartet, and it sounds so wonderful. And the UCLA Quartet doesn't sound quite the same. And then again, the answer is, the UCLA Quartet plays as well as you dance. Which is true.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they're good. They're good. And if they had the Juilliard Quartet, I even had the Juilliard Quartet, you know, have them come to rehearsal. You know what their answer was? Gee, they sound so puny. Because they couldn't go like that, you know?
Acoustic verity.
Huh?
Acoustic verity.
Yes. So, you know, these problems, I think we've all had in common, and I know what the trials and tribulations of putting an ensemble together. Even at Juilliard now, when I have the class in choreographers and composers, and naturally, we're not going to play a tape, unless it is, naturally, if it's live tape, as I call it, that's something else. If it's layerings, or if it's electronically manipulated material, then that's the only way we can do it. But if it's a string quartet, or if it's any kind of ensemble for acoustic instruments, they have to be there. They have to be there. It's not going to be music for the dance performance anymore. And again, this works quite well. If you say, we have Danzak just around the corner. They go to a restaurant, they're going to have Appalachian Spring in your booth, you know, to soothe you. That's when they understand what you mean. I guess I should start.
I just have a question. Do you think that improvisation can be taught to musicians? And the reason I ask this is that I had 6 sessions with Dane Rudyard, which were a real treasure in the mid-70s, and I considered him to be not only an amazing improviser, but someone who could actually get you to improvise in ways that you never did before. Do you think it could be part of training?
Yes, it could be, but it's just not encouraged. I don't teach it as such, you know, and I couldn't teach composition since I was never taught in the first place. But what I do is to almost kick them into it, you know, inspire them into doing this, encourage them. And it's amazing. Once, it's like tasting blood. Once they realize they can do that, oh boy. And they're such good musicians, you know, they can just play anything. And if you need it at school, if they weren't already wonderful. So it's just a pleasure to have them. Once they get past that threshold of really ingrained ambition toward this endeavor.
I just have a comment to make too. The Happening is not dead, by the way. In Minneapolis in February, Merce Cunningham is coming up. The Walker Art Center has developed a program called Flux, where they took over the Target Center and commissioned people to choreograph pieces in the various spaces in the Target Center, which is a big sports arena.
They're now called encounters, and they're called, and all kinds of, and so, yeah, they are the children of the happening. So it, of course it's still alive, but it's a little different than it should be. Also, I must say, whenever possible, and this was true in Los Angeles and it's now true in New York, I have people come to these classes. I have Merce Cunningham come to these classes. John Cage came 3 times since I was at Juilliard. And it shakes them up, believe me, when he says, I don't like pushy music. I don't like music that evokes emotion or represents emotion. And you know, you've been studying Beethoven. I don't like Beethoven. And then they realized that, you know, we are very good friends. John Cage and I were very close friends. And I never did anything by chance, ever, and he wouldn't have wanted it. Really devoted people to their ideas and philosophies don't recruit. They don't want groupies. They don't want people to simply march in lockstep with their thoughts. They simply want to have it understood, appreciated, and be positively accepted. Even if you don't do that, it doesn't mean you have to be the same thing in order to nod and understand it and further it. Yes, I'm stopping.
10 minutes more.
I have 10 minutes more, if you want to. Go on. I thought we had somebody coming at 10.
He's the one.
She is the
Pardon?
That's him.
Oh, it's you? Oh, I'm sorry. No, I don't want to step on your time. I know it's, we'll do another 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thanks for your specific curricular question.
Yes.
You talked about the medieval connection to Sprechstimme. You talked about the Rohani devices involved
Yes.
and also the Beethoven sonatas.
Well, no,
Can you talk about Romanticism and Renaissance? I'm ready to totally change my curriculum for music or dance class.
well, it's not, look what I did, yeah. I go more from classicism to neoclassicism. When I talk about sonata form, it's really easier to give the example of, for instance, the Prokofiev classical symphony, because it's written according to the recipe. You couldn't get anything closer to, you know, to that prescription. And because you can't find a single Mozart or Haydn sonata that's that close to what you want, then the Prokofiev classical symphony. So I don't care if I start the other end. It hooks up. And the concept of going chronologically is, I think, overrated because they make the connection eventually anyhow. And they know the 17th century came after the 16th, for goodness sake. But to know that all these things have the threads to now is more important.
Yes, it's the 17th
Romanticism, neo-romanticism. So I have Jacob Goldman come in and talk about, you know, why he thinks of himself as a neo-romanticist. And he has trouble saying why. Because most of us know what we're doing, but the verbalization is something else again. And this is where we need to, and I'm excited about the challenge, you know, working with, in a different configuration from university configuration. As far as the Renaissance, romanticism, I haven't thought about that. I need to think about that some more because it's obviously a connection in light of enlightenment and new enlightenment. I think from that point of view, more than even the musical connection itself. And that's a very good thought.
Yeah, I was thinking of people like Rockford and John Adams who have a seeming affinity for Mahler, this kind of sonority.
But you see, Rockford, who has also come to the class, he jumps around so,
He does.
you know. I don't know whether you heard the symphony that has about 5 minutes of Mozart in the middle of it, and I said, George, you know, I thought it was in another world. He says, if it's in my piece, it's mine. Even though it was really a very long stretch of the Mozart symphony. Very long, not just, you know, very often you hear a quote that emerges and submerges, and you think, oh, did I hear that, you know? And then you look at the score, and you did hear it. And you hear the Mahler, or somebody, some quote. But and he's already abandoned that. And then he's gone to something else, and he's abandoned that. And he started with 12-tone lighting, and he's not doing that anymore. And I know more at this point about George's not doing than what he's doing at present. But yes.
You've seen a few different generations go through, and you hear comments made about the present generation of student that's coming. Do you see, we were talking somewhat about this yesterday, that there's a lack.
Let me tell you an anecdote that I'm fond of. I think it may help. This was still at UCLA, so it's now 8 years ago, but it's still this group, you know. In this aesthetic class, I also had some theater students. And we were talking about the 60s and how exciting they were, you know, in retrospect. Maybe they weren't all that exciting when we were in the midst of it, but they are exciting because there was this wonderful resistance, pitting oneself against this, pitting oneself against that, and opening the barriers and, you know, opening the frontiers, and it was a lively time. And so while I was describing that and brought in examples, one theater student got all issues. He was very upset. And he got up and he said, well, that's all well and good, and you worked with Page and Cunningham and all these wonderful people, and you had a marvelous time.